Hello, and welcome to our podcast with me, Mark, and my associate, Steve. As always, Steve has been looking through the media and will pick up anything of particular interest and try and look at what's behind things. We have a discussion, put my opinions forward. I do not know what Steve's going to talk about, which makes it even more interesting. And again, if you ever have any comments or questions for us, please put them in the comments below. Right, over to you, Steve.
Okay, hi people. So here we go. Something interesting that happened over the last couple of days is that our friend van der Leyen, who's the president of the EU, recently had a meeting with African and Caribbean countries. There was a group of them that got together and she wanted to strike a deal with them, very similar to what China has done with a lot of countries, with their One Belt, One Road project, the China project. However, for van der Leyen's proposal to be accepted, all these countries, they had to denounce Russia. And they had to, I suppose, start by putting sanctions on Russia. And this is what they didn't want to do. They said that they're neutral countries, and that, you know, I found it interesting that she made this meeting, because normally the West and the developed world tends to ignore the undeveloped world, which is why the undeveloped world remains the undeveloped world. And so it strikes me that the undeveloped world, Africa and the Caribbean, they're becoming more important on the world stage, especially with BRICS coming on the scene. And it would be just that would be interesting to get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I caught some headlines about this. Yeah, I mean, African nations, Asians, are like, they do tread carefully. They don't want to get drawn into, which is basically a European dispute at the moment. And I keep saying that. I know America are. Yes. Now, I'm just thinking off the top of my head with this. I'm thinking about elements of history. I mean, Africa always had a rough, as you said, a rough ride with Europeans being involved in it, and it's never ended well for the Africans. You know, some quite obvious things or not so obvious things. I don't know what Russian involvement is across Africa. Probably the supplying it, or Russia's good business for them as well.
As far as I know, the trade, the grain deals from Ukraine, which Russia was organizing.
Yeah,
they've just stopped because Russia leveled the port at what was it? I can't remember the name of the port.
Yeah,
it's a foreign name, but
yeah,
it's the only port. It's the only seaport of the Ukraine, and the Russians have leveled that, so there's no grain to be left, no more left.
Yeah,
the Russians were actually complaining because the West was intercepting all the grain and keeping most of it for themselves. But that's something else.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, it's the old geopolitical thing, trying to drag isolate Russia as far as you can, which isn't
Odessa, the port of Odessa.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I can picture it on the map. I couldn't remember what it was. Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's an interesting situation. Yeah, and they're not going to get dragged into any involvement in a conflict. It's possibly they don't agree with Russia. You can't overall agree with what Russia are doing, even if you understand the reasons behind it. Yeah, none of us are going to say yes, go, carry on Russia, carry on bombing civilians. The words of Donald Trump, I just want everyone to stop killing each other. Yeah. Okay, I don't bring you into it, but yeah, that's the sentiments I said before. Just stop killing each other and see what we can sort out. I don't know how much respect the EU has got outside its own EU bubble, as it were. It's obvious that she doesn't have as much influence as she probably thought she had globally, which is quite
She has a
laughable.
very she has a very high horse to climb down from.
Yes, yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, we watch podcasts. I see all the time they're talking about that the EU is going to disappear in so many years or something. I don't know. I can't see it. I mean, people hang on to that project for grim death. It would be very difficult if it disappeared tomorrow. We're finding enough problems with Brexit. Yeah, they're taking that apart. But getting back to this African thing, yeah, I mean, Africa are going to look to who gives them the best deals. The BRICS countries will probably be far more beneficial to Africa because they'll get more of a say, African
Yeah,
nations, in what's
there you
going
are.
on. I mean, okay,
I understand that the African countries are going to have a common currency,
mm,
a little bit like the euro,
yeah,
but in Africa. And so they seem to be organizing themselves.
mm,
I think it's interesting that the terms we use underdeveloped countries, they're organizing themselves.
yeah,
If they can sort out their political problems,
mm,
internal political problems, with corruption and stuff like that,
mm,
which I mean we're having all over the world. Nobody's innocent. I always say,
mm.
no politician is innocent.
No, no.
Um, if they can sort of simmer it down like in the UK does,
Mm,
but keep it less, keep the corruption to the minimum.
mm,
And I think they'll only do that when their economy is stable, because they don't need to rob as much. You
mm.
know, you can see the hotspots of corruption
Mm,
mainly in the countries
mm,
where the currency is very weak
yeah,
and where the economy is very, very tumultuous,
mm,
uh, going up and down, up and down, up and down. It's a little bit like here in Brazil. I
mm,
remember when I first came here in Brazil, that inflation here in Brazil was like 50% a month.
mm,
And um, the business people, how they did their deals
mm,
is that they charged the price of what it would be at the end of the next month
yeah,
and not of what it is today,
mm,
because they had to combat inflation.
mm,
So instead of charging one, they'd charge two,
yeah,
knowing that at the end of next month, it'll be the value of one.
mm,
you know. So,
yeah,
and that's how they do. That's why a lot of bands. My past is been involved. I've been involved in music,
mm,
and bands in who play for local government events.
mm,
They charge an enormous amount of money. Enormous. Their cachets were enormous, and I thought to myself at the time, that's far too much for the band.
mm,
You get million real
mm,
cachets,
mm,
and then it dawned on me, is because local government, they don't
mm.
pay you today.
No,
If you're lucky, they'll pay you in 3 months' time.
yeah, that's good.
So the bands have to charge so much,
Yeah,
because then in 3 months' time, it's probably what the cachet is probably worth.
yeah.
You know. So sorry, but I digress. coming
No,
back
no, no,
to
no, no. It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm just what you're saying, but yeah, I mean, okay, corruption around the world. I mean, you're not going to start saying things here, but obviously in Europe, we've got probably legalized corruption to a certain extent.
Oof,
Yeah, yeah,
I was
uh,
going to touch on that.
yeah, and um, yeah, I mean, Brazil. I mean, Brazil's probably the only country I know of that actually had a concerted effort to find all the corruption with Croatian car wash.
Yeah,
Um, they're fair play to the Brazilians. At least they put their hands up to it. So we got a problem. We tried to investigate how wherever it went. It probably went a bit deeper than people thought.
yeah.
Um, a fair play. I mean, okay, legacy. I think it's Dilma who brought that in, but the
When
only
I when
country,
sorry, go on.
yeah, the only country in the world that I know of that actually said, "Hey, we got a problem. We want to sort it out." Um, it's a I mean, okay. I mean, despite what it say, the Americans take corruption very, very seriously. If you get caught, you're in as long as you have 25 years. Yeah. They don't like it at all. I mean, I don't know how corrupt or uncorrupt the US is. Um, we get the world rankings every so often. Um,
Well, you
and
know who makes the world rankings
well, I don't know.
are
Again,
not gonna are not gonna accuse themselves.
no, no, no.
So, you know, you get places like the US who's always going to say that we are the most honest. But if you watched, I don't know if you watched yesterday, the deployment of two whistleblowers
Yeah.
who work for the Inland Revenue Service of the US,
Mm,
saying how the Biden family
mm,
was protected by the Justice Department
mm,
um, when they were investigating them for tax fraud and
yeah.
receiving monies from abroad,
Mm,
which basically were payments because the Bidens didn't actually produce anything to sell.
no.
The only thing they could sell was influence,
Mm,
you know, and basically that's what was shown to be
yeah.
yesterday. And these whistleblowers were saying how the Department of Justice,
Mm,
the DOJ, helped protect the Bidens from being investigated.
yeah.
Because when the truth of all that comes out, it's
Yeah.
either going to be long, really long prison sentences,
Mm,
or it's one of the biggest misunderstandings this planet has ever seen. You know,
yeah.
and all that will depend on the elections, the next elections, because
Mm,
if the Democrats get elected again, of
mm,
course, all of this is going to be ignored.
yeah.
You know, and but if the Republicans get elected
Mm,
with a decent majority, it's going to be fireworks in the US.
yeah.
It's going to be fireworks, fireworks.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're seeing the rumblings now with the Republicans, what they're doing with all their inquiries, their House committees and things, because they got basic control now.
Mm.
And they've probably got some sympathy from some people on the Democrat side who are beginning to quake a bit when it's all coming out. I mean, yeah, they're talking about this third party coming from somewhere to, if you like, be the spoilers. I mean, whether,
Like a green party.
yeah,
That's
um,
Manchin. That's Manchin, I think. Manchin and
yeah.
what's the lady called? She
Oh,
also is a Democrat and sometimes votes for conservative ideals.
oh,
I
yeah,
can't remember. I can't remember what her name is.
yeah. It's yeah. I mean, these people are. I mean, when they're speaking, I mean, yeah, it's a yeah. They tend to have a bit of a conscience, and they can't go with what they've been told to do. Um, yeah, which could go very well for them or very badly at some point. We'll see. Um, yeah, it's yeah. I mean, getting back to our initial thing. I mean, I'm just trying to think. Again, I only caught the headline. I didn't actually read it too deeply. Um, but it's I mean, yeah, the developing country. When we say developing, though, because that's an interesting statement to make, and I've often wondered about this. That we both live in Brazil. Brazilians call themselves a developing country. I go 20 minutes down the road to me, and we got Porta Digital in our city, which is one of the main research and development hubs in the world, almost for digital systems and things. That doesn't look like a developing place. You go to some of the offices around there. Okay, some of them are not good, but yeah, in Recife and particularly around the shopping centre, I've been in some of the couple of offices there that are most modern you're ever going to go into. I know it's pockets.
Yeah, I was just about to stop you on that one because I would say, yeah, you can't really claim that the whole country is developed if when you're only looking at specific things, you know.
Oh yeah.
I think developing country is a better word because of the connotations of what people use with the term third world.
Yeah.
I think third world means a poor, underdeveloped country, which doesn't mean that.
Yeah.
The first world, the second world, and the third world are all products of the Second World War.
Yeah.
Where after the Second World War, the Americans and the British, they had their countries which they wanted to keep for themselves. That was the first world. Russia and the East and the Eastern Bloc, the old USSR, wanted their countries, and that was the Second World.
Yeah.
And the countries that weren't chosen by one or the other was the Third World.
Mm.
And it was just that the countries in the Third World were not chosen by the powers who won the Second World War.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with riches, nothing to do with development. Which is why I prefer to use the phrase countries that are underdeveloped or in development, you know, rather than first world, second world, third world.
No, it just, I mean, obviously, I mean, it's just, I know what you said, but it's just an interesting thought for me, that, you know, when we say developing, I'm making the point of Africa, you go to Africa, certain cities in South Africa, and, Uganda has been in the news quite recently in the UK as well, different things. Right. It's not an undeveloped country in that respect, in that you go there, it's got some very modern places, and it's actually got a good standard of living or good facilities. So when people were saying, oh, you know, I want to put refugees there, it's as good a place. It's probably better than the UK in many ways. They've got opportunities there they probably wouldn't have. It's a rather subjective term, and it's getting back to what these African nations want. What's good for them? They do not want to isolate potential people in the future, or good allies in the future. But what it is, tied in with Russia, there's also China. China have a big foothold in Africa. We know that. Maybe they're a bit. Is how close maybe Russia and China are. We don't always know. Different reports. They talk to each other. There was, there's just at one point in their history, they both had different flavors of communism. Because I remember learning at school. Yeah. It's as I said, it's a bit of an unstable geopolitical situation. As I said, I don't see World War III, despite the scaremongers, coming from the situation directly in Ukraine.
Well, you know, I heard that I think his name is, I want to say Youngkin, but I'm not really sure if that's his name. But anyway, he's one of the spokespeople for the Defense Department of the US.
Yeah.
And he said that the US is not prepared to go to war with Russia.
No.
You know, I mean, they've depleted the stocks, giving all these weapons to Ukraine. Get this. This is interesting. This is interesting. The American military, if you're in the American military,
Yeah.
and you want to transition from either a bloke to a woman or a woman to a bloke, first of all, you're exempt from physical tests. I mean, like running and jumping and the physical activity, the training, physical training.
Yeah.
You're exempt from that, and also you won't be deployed because you're having your hormones changed, which makes you ask the obvious question:
Yeah.
why are you in the military in the first place? If you're not going to be trained to be a hardened, because soldiers are killing machines.
Yeah.
It's a killing machine, and so if you're not going to be trained to the highest ability to kill as much people as possible, and when there's a war on, you don't even have to go to the war, then it makes a mockery of being a soldier, surely.
Well, it did. I mean, when you compare that with what happened a few years ago, that the Russians produced their recruitment video for the military. Basically, there were alpha males in it. It's probably an overemphasis in the other direction. But I mean, they probably are tough guys. I mean, you need a certain type of person prepared to go in the military. And yeah, I found myself went to recruiting place once for the army because I heard an advert on the radio. I was a little bit older, 25, coming up to 25, and they were desperate for people, so they would take the age group. And okay, up to 25, you're still fit. As the recruitment sergeant said to me, looked at me, I was a little bit overweight, wasn't fat, wasn't obese. And he said, well, yeah. He said, yeah, you don't look top notch. I said, no, well, I've been unemployed. I've been sitting at home not doing a lot. He said, yeah, don't worry. He said, we'll get you fit. Yeah. And the whole emphasis, and it was challenge. You're going to challenge yourself and all this. And it was made perfectly clear as well that one day you might have to pick up. It doesn't matter. I was going to go into a specialist group, well, engineers. That's my plan. And he said, yeah, he said, but you got to remember, you're a tradesman second and a soldier first.
Right.
And you might have to actually pick up that rifle, whatever you've got, and aim it and fire it. And yeah, it was made perfectly clear to me that, and they did ask me the question, what is your sexuality? Because at the time it was, oh yeah, they were going to recruit people of that. And he says, although despite what you hear, it's not quite as directly capable. This is going back the early 90s. Oh yeah, early 90s. And it's like yeah, it was made perfectly clear to me. You've got to be a tough bugger. You're going to be cold. You're going to be hungry. You've still got to function in certain situations. You've got to be able to, yeah, be prepared to go to a war, wherever that may be.
I watched a documentary about the 6 weeks basic training.
Yeah,
for a Green Beret.
Yeah,
Become a Green Beret. And one of the first things that the lads had to do was to bull up the knife, fork, and spoon, which they all issued with a knife, fork, and spoon and plate for the mess hall.
Yeah.
They had to bull it up, make it really, really shiny, and put it in the locker.
Yeah.
And they were given measurements.
Yeah.
The space between the knife, fork, and spoon.
Yeah.
And a lot of the soldiers didn't really understand why they had to do that. It's a knife, fork, and spoon for crying out loud. But then the penny dropped with me is that because a little bit further on, they're going to be issued with a firearm. And if you can't look after a knife, fork, and spoon, how are you going to look after the mechanisms of a rifle, or a machine gun, or a tank? You've got to start really at the beginning, and it does take a lot of a lot of cadets, if you like, by surprise.
Well, yeah.
You know what they have to do.
Well, they deliberately fail them, and it's like when you expected to clean your barrack room, and I remember the white glove,
Yeah.
the white glove, and they go along there, and if I've had a bit of dust, collectively, everyone is in trouble.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter who cleaned it, who was meant to clean it. You're all in trouble. You're all going to be running around that yard a bit more, you know, parade ground. Yeah, it's to toughen you up. It's to make you think. I mean, yeah, they say that. I mean, yeah, this is British squaddies I'm talking about. I mean, the Americans, the guys on the ground in America are tough people. A lot of them are or were. Yeah, I mean, there's concern. You're hearing it. You see ex-vets, veterans um, on some YouTube channels saying, "I can't believe what it is." The reports I'm getting in our day, you basically you didn't you did the one thing you didn't sort of say was even hint that you were considered yourself to be not what. Yeah, I'll try not to say things to get us banned, but yeah, it is a it's a philosophy, and yeah, you begin to wonder: is the military being deliberately weakened? You see some of the adverts for the British military. It is a far cry from what I went through in the early 90s, where I wouldn't say I was sternly spoken to by the recruitment sergeant, but he was certainly pushing me to see my reaction to a couple of things. Yeah, and then they weed them out, and that's it. You go for your basic training. I regret not doing it a little bit because I don't know if I'd have passed it or not. And it's like, would I have made it? 24, I think I've probably had enough of somebody yelling at me. If you're going when you're 16 or 18 and that becomes your way of life, you become institutionalized a little bit in the military, certainly. But that's all part of it. You're part of something. And that's it. They're called comrades. That's what it is. It's you're there to protect each other, look out for each other. So you make sure that your mate has cleaned the row, yeah, and things like that. Yeah. Anyway,
Let's come back to van der Leyen
yeah,
and the motives of why she would have gone to Africa and spoken to these African countries
mm,
and Caribbean countries,
mm,
which, funnily enough, um, I don't know if it's a coincidence, but the population of all the countries of the where she went,
mm,
in the vast majority, are not white.
yeah,
You know, Africa, and the Caribbean.
mm,
I, I just throw that out there. It's not to be dwelled upon.
mm,
But if we look at the European Union and
mm,
the countries and what's happening to the countries of the European Union, we see that Germany is still in a recession.
mm,
Still, Italy has the highest debt, highest national debt
yeah,
in, I think, its history.
mm,
In its history, um, France is going to pot.
mm,
You know, and I think that it's Brussels, Belgium, I'd
mm,
say, is also teetering.
mm,
And all these countries, the population of all these countries is accustomed to a certain lifestyle.
mm,
And I think that they're struggling now. I know that they are in Germany.
mm,
I remember the podcast of our friend Survival, what's her name?
mm,
Molly, I think her name was, who was saying, you know, that the Germans are having to having to buy cheaper things from the supermarket and things like that.
mm,
Um, and I really think that the countries in Europe are suffering.
mm,
The Germans try to blame it on Russia, of course. They
yes,
need to have a bogeyman.
mm,
But I mean, the problems in Germany are not caused by Russia,
no,
are not caused by Russia going into the Ukraine.
mm,
They're caused by Germany
mm,
refusing to buy Russian energy,
Mm.
and consequently have to buy energy at twice the price from across the pond,
Mm.
and therefore, basically, the breaking the companies who are keeping the economy afloat
Yeah.
because the price of energy is just so much, and it reflects on everything.
Mm.
But they're refusing to admit that it's the sanctions that are causing the problems,
Yeah.
and not Russia going to Ukraine.
Of course.
If the West didn't stick the nose in Russia v Ukraine,
Mm.
that conflict would have been over by now.
Mm. Oh,
It
yeah.
would have been over. It would have been such a
Mm.
fast thing
Awful to
um,
say, yeah.
to resolve
Mm.
between themselves, and
Mm.
they're always fighting amongst themselves anyway.
Well, yeah, I was going to say
I heard recently that the CIA is starting to raise its ugly head in um, in Kosovo
mm.
now,
Of course. Yeah.
which is it isn't helping. You
No.
know, the people in Kosovo were complaining that the British were there
Mm.
trying to destabilize the situation there.
Mm.
And it seems I don't know exactly know what the CIA were doing in Kosovo, but I, I sure know that it's nothing nice. It's nothing helpful.
Yeah.
It has to be for the Americans' interest.
Yeah, we'll read about that in history books in 40 years' time.
Yeah,
We won't, but yeah, others will.
yeah.
Um, it's a hopefully we'll get to read about it or read it online or
I'm
some.
really I'm tired. I'm tired. I'm tired now, man. I can't wait 50 years. I'll be
Yeah,
exhausted.
yeah. It's this. Um, again, yeah. I mean, history does repeat itself. I mean, I do think the lessons and everything else. Yes, you can draw parallel. Well, you can draw parallels to say history repeats itself is quite true. But there's a book actually called um the full turning or something like that. I forgot what it's called, but it actually looks at everything happens in 80-year cycles, and it's
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
true.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. And yeah, watched interesting videos about it and I'd like to read it, but it's probably quite a heavy read to sit down and physically do. But yeah, every 20 years there's a thing, and you can compare it. And okay, you can tie what happens in the US with the UK. The UK kind of follows.
Normally the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. But Brazil, okay, the other comparison, Brazil's a slightly different timeline. It happens 20 years, human nature. Yeah,
Brazil tends to copy. It doesn't take the lead.
no,
When 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 the US and the UK do things, they do things at the same time.
yeah,
It's like they're both taking the lead. They're both spoken to each other. Let's do it like this, and then they do it
yeah,
like this.
yeah,
Brazil will do things that they think are beneficial for them. They'll copy. They'll
yeah,
copy a few years later.
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it is. Yeah, I mean, Brazil is a. Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to economists about Brazil. Brazil is a bit of a strange case, like you say. It's 10 years at least behind sometimes in
Yeah,
what it does. It waits until everyone else is coming out of recession before it decides to go in as well. I mean, Brazil has got as many resources probably as most African states have.
yeah,
Um,
sure. More.
I mean, yeah, you could close the borders off, and yeah, Brazilians could quite happily feed themselves. They
For
basically do.
sure. Yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, the only thing is they need the fertilizers from either Canada or Ukraine or that region, Russia, to actually do things. But yeah, because
yeah.
they can't produce it themselves. The Canadians
Right.
are not going to be helpful. Um, it's a Yeah, it's a strange even fuel. But yeah, again, that's Brazil. Yeah, I mean, it is a, but yeah, this thing is looking at cycles, and it's actually spot on, and it looks at between the War of Independence to the Civil War was about 80 years, and then other things. It's thinking, wow, yeah, and all the cycles in between, the 20-year turnings.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and it is quite an interesting thing. I know you can take any sort of element of history and say make it fit the facts, but it does work to a point.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
okay, well,
Circle of life, man.
yeah, well,
Circle of life.
we're kind of drawing to a conclusion
Which
today
is
on
why I
the
said
time
the
limit.
circle of life.
Yeah, yeah. I hope you have people listening have enjoyed it. Our mumblings and things that we like to talk
I tell
about.
you what, man, this half hour has gone past really quick.
Yeah, yeah, it does. I was just thinking that. I've just seen my timer come up, thinking, wow, it's But yeah, as always, it's a pleasure talking to you, Steve. Yeah. If
Right.
anyone's got any comments or any questions or something they'd like Steve to even look at, because he drives this obviously, please put it in the comments. Or I think I'll put a email address, my email address on the on trying to speak, not good for podcast. But yeah, there's an email address available if you'd rather just do that, or if you just want to contact us, please do so. And we're always happy to answer any questions. If you disagree with us, we quite like that, because we like to explain
Like other
ourselves.
points of view.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
You
that's
can
it.
disagree with us, but you have to say why.
Yeah,
Let's put it like
exactly.
that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's no harm in that. It's how we like to understand things, and
Okay.
yeah, we always say that is our point of view. So I don't know if Steve, you want to finish with anything or any comments or anything?
Really. Bye bye, people.
Yeah, and goodbye
Be
from me.
candid.
Yeah, I hopefully see you next week. Goodbye. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. We look forward to seeing you again. Goodbye.